about purpose-led campaigns. What makes a campaign purpose-led, and how do agencies do that authentically and credibly?
So how often do you see brands be tactical, opportunistic, where it's about jumping on a trend, and when you sort of scratch the surface, you realize, hey, hang on, there's nothing else here. It's just opportunity. Whenever we look at campaigns, whether it's something purpose-led or not, we always ask ourselves, is it credible? Does it make sense for our brand? Should we be playing in that space? I think often we don't ask those questions enough. The second question is it sustainable? Are you just capitalizing on something, or is this something that you're really embedding yourself in a narrative?
Connection and successful connection with target audiences is super important. It's essential to kind of measure that positive contribution. How do you believe, I know you're a little bit close to the VW work, of course, but the VW work and maybe the Finding the Forgotten Graduate, how do you believe they manage that connection?
The most awesome thing about digital, firstly, is that it creates so many different chapters to storytelling now. And I think when it comes to creating work now, it's whatever content you create or whatever you push out there is only one chapter of a story. So just going to MJ's point about, if you might be saying one thing in one place, but if that same narrative is not being carried through into the various touch points of your business, it's just going to fall apart. So what I love the VW work, but that came from us asking very hard questions.
Yeah.
Going, it's easy to jump on trends and go, oh, what are people talking about? What are people going, oh, I'm really keen about diversity in this aspect or inclusivity here or the environment. And you go, okay, cool, but what is actually right for our DNA? When people look at it and go I see that. And for us, we're going, okay, if you're part of the problem, you need to be part of the solution. For us, it made us kind of look far beyond the walls of our own business and going okay, what are the different touch points? Who are the people, the different parts of the ecosystem that might not necessarily be part of our product or buy our product, but could be impacted by it. With the Forgotten Graduate, I adore that piece. And for me, it's just, there's so many chapters to the business that just pulls you in, and it came from an ethos of what they want to do, and they went, that piece of work, the hours and the research and the craft that went into that is extraordinary.
Many of these campaigns and the shortlisted campaigns were, they've gone viral on social media. How do brands manage, obviously, sometimes the client expectation for that to happen, as well as, I guess, that line of cancel culture?
With an agency and client relationship, what's really important is that both sides really understand the brand, the business, the ethos, the culture, because what you don't want to happen is, you create something that's inauthentic, that's the recipe for disaster with a brand. So I think we all have a responsibility as marketers, as brand owners, as agency leaders, to have those difficult conversations before the work is done, before the work is created, so you don't find yourself in a situation where, things take a bad turn. Are you spending enough time really unpacking the insights, really understanding why you're doing this piece of work, why you're getting involved in this conversation? Because if you can't have those difficult conversations and answer those difficult questions internally, then you're just opening yourself up to scrutiny on social platforms. Sometimes it's unavoidable, and that's where, crisis comms and all those kinds of things come into play. But I think it really starts in the ideation phase. Do you really understand what you're trying to achieve? Do you really understand the message you're trying to get across? If you don't, if you can't answer the questions that are being asked in the boardroom that you have in the back of your mind, and you're not speaking up about it as a leader in your industry or in your company, that's where the problem starts. So if you can mitigate that, I think you're winning.
How do we balance that line of selling, positioning a brand, but then also maintaining inclusivity?
If the brand has, and I'll call it a backbone, an ethical backbone, if they have that and they have a point of reference, then being able to have that balancing act becomes a lot easier versus kind of, and as much as we want intention when it comes to D&I and purpose and all of those kind of things, the moment you start forcing things, then you start kind of crossing the lines of either sort of trauma baiting or baiting people, race baiting, and all of those kind of things. But I think the moment you kind of use the ethical backbone of a brand as sort of the reference point, and that's not only clear for the people internally with the brand teams, but also the agencies that work on those brands, then you can create a piece of work and naturally that balance happens.
So for me, I've seen tons of campaigns around purpose, but they're often for a season or a campaign. I haven't really seen any exceptional examples when it comes to longevity. Has anyone experienced anything, either here or globally?
Adidas did an awesome campaign. They were also like really strong about this in terms of inclusion and diversity around many stories of athletes. And they did a thing that was called Runner 321. Check it out. It's basically 321 is the chromosome for Down syndrome. They started looking at like all the different athletes that attend these races, and there's one Down syndrome athlete who's one of the first athletes they've signed on with Down syndrome, and he's like, there was never any, I could never like really resonate or identify with anyone in your advertising and your branding and everything. So they basically took the number 321, and they created in terms of their races, every number 321 was reserved for someone with Down syndrome. And then they carried it through. So that was like, you look at everyone else and go like, that would be amazing. But they carried through their conviction, and they went to every one of the other races. They were generally sponsored by rival brands, so the New Balances and Nikes and stuff. And said, listen, this is what we're on about. Would you like to be involved? And every single one of them signed up. So every global international race, number 321 is for Down syndrome.
Being on the judging panel for a couple of years now, something that we sometimes do see is brilliant work with no results demonstrated in your case studies or in your entry. So don't forget about that, because it's not just about the beautiful, creative, and something that tugs on your heartstrings. That's fantastic. But if the actual results are not in there, and whether it is just number of conversations started, the reach and the impact of your story, that's great. That is something that we look for. But if those results are not present in your entry, then it's very difficult to judge.
When it comes to striking that balance between purpose and profit, I mean, we know we are working with diminishing marketing budgets, and also considering that to really make that impact and land those results, it does require a lot of resources. So how would you guys say that, as marketers, we do to strike that balance to make sure that, we hit the nail on the head on both sides? And
I think back to there's a paint company in the States, and essentially their paint is for airplanes. And obviously the paint that is used for airplanes is not the same paint that's used on these walls, because it needs to sort of take certain things into consideration, like climate control and all of that kind of stuff. And what they saw as part of their campaign is that obviously the concrete on the ground gets really hot during the summer in the States, and when dogs lie there, they're actually burning their paws and all of that kind of stuff. So what they did is they just started pretty much painting the pavements around different cities in the States with that paint. And essentially what that did is that when it got really hot, obviously that paint would cool the concrete, and as a result, dogs could sort of lie without hurting themselves. And I think there is a good example of a brand, not necessarily kind of like directly looking for their profit, but knowing that their actions and sort of solving a real life problem is not only getting their brand out there, but eventually, and it's probably a word that CMOs and CFOs probably don't want to hear when they're looking for money now, but eventually that profit will come in.
I like doing this exercise myself in terms of I look at what brands I'm loyal to, and I try to figure out why am I loyal to those brands. So Etches Chutney, I've been loyal to them because I love their flavor, their taste. For those colleagues over here in insurance, I'm loyal to Outsurance, not because I think their premiums are great or anything like that. It's not a factor for me, but it's because there's a pointsman, or a points person rather, on my route to work, and I see value in that. And there could be a case to say that that is purpose-led marketing. Yeah. It's still branding, it's still covered in all the trappings of that, but that's how that brand speaks to me. And again, do that exercise yourself.
I think thing that stood out for me the most was a lot of this creative business transformation is actually driven by technology and digital and all of that, which was interesting. For me, creativity for creativity's sake is completely useless. We need creativity to actually grow our businesses, new business models, new clients. If we can't use creativity in that way, then I don't think we are spending our company monies very well. But I don't think we should be complicating digital. I think we should be using it in simple ways that simplify our clients' lives and ensure that they grow our business.
What makes a publisher today? Is it News24? Is it EWN? Or is it Mr. Beast? How do we weigh those two?
The lines are a little bit blurred. You know, lots of publishers consider themselves brands. Lots of brands consider themselves publishers. Lots of people consider themselves publishers, marketers, creators. So I think that's just the space, you know, that we're in as an industry, as people. But I think the important thing is like there's space for everyone, and there's space for every type of publisher. It's almost like how you categorize them, and again, depending on, you know, what are you trying to solve for, what are you trying to achieve as a brand, you'll find your space in each of those pillars.
How do we, as agencies, then manage the nuance between all of these, from influencer content creators to publishers to brands that are also now publishing?
If you as a brand understand what you're trying to achieve and you go authentically into each of those categories, that's kind of how you win. You can't put the same ad on Media24 or News24 that you're going to give to an influencer. It's never going to work.
Sure.
So it really goes down to tailoring the message, but also just, you know, there's a place for everybody.
Yeah.
And the brands have to know exactly what is the objective that they want, what's their long-term plan, their DNA, and then align themselves with the right one. Not just like, cool, our idea are influencers. It's like, that's not an idea, you know? And there's a radical difference between influencers and creators. Like there's some brilliant content creators, like their skill sets are off the charts.
Key theme that came across in the entire publisher category this year was really the use of like multiple platforms to tell a story. And I think that, you know, a lot of the more traditional, like bigger publishers have been quite smart in how they've started to use platforms like TikTok and Instagram to start telling stories to a different audience.
The agency's job is obviously to understand the client's problem and to solve it. Whereas maybe the publishers or media owners is to kind of offer a platform in order to assist in getting it out there. And I think a lot of the times from a collaboration point of view, we probably misuse the word collaboration in the sense of having to get everyone in the room when from a specialization point of view, that's not how it should work. So rather than it being more collaboration, I think from a brand and publisher or media owner perspective, it should be really media owners and publishers working a lot closer with the agencies.
Pulling back to the very reason we're here in terms of Bookmark Awards and the work we've seen and go like, what are the stuff that stands out? It's creating the right work, shown to the right people, the right time. And that's what digital gives us. You know, you have that information to know that you're creating really great work that is insightful for this audience, for the challenge, for the brand. It gets they get the right eyes at the right time on the right platform because you've used the right people. And that's what separates the good from the great.
You might have the right solution, but the client has the wrong objective. And often as marketers, we are beholden to those who are senior than us that might have a different way of measuring success, or we might be dealing with an audience of one, right? So it's someone who loves a certain radio station, so they just assume all campaigns need to be there because everyone is like them. So my plea to publishers in the audience, to agencies as well, don't downplay education, don't always work from assumptions of trust and expertise, really important. But at the same time, it's important to balance educating with not being arrogant.
So I want to bring it to a close, unfortunately, and I want to ask each of you, looking at this year's submissions, but casting your mind forward a year from now, thinking of the trends in the industry, tech, purpose, publishing, what's the one thing that you're most excited about for next year's bookmarks?
We speak a lot about it's Africa, it's our time, all of that kind of stuff. And I think, but that's not necessarily showing in our work, in the sense, especially from a digital point of view and adopting tech. I think we're still looking to the West and then adapting accordingly this side. But I think there's so much that we can kind of take from here globally.
Some of the work that really resonated with me this year wasn't something that had a huge budget. I mean, it was a really clear insight that was executed well with business results. And the last thing is, I am also seeing influencer marketing evolving as well, where there's a bigger onus on influencers now to really be part of it, to not necessarily be treated as channels.
I'm probably most excited to see new faces, not people faces, but new brand, publisher, whatever it is, faces in the bookmarks. I think, this year, looking at the spread of work that we've seen, it's really refreshing to see some new agency names, some new brand names, some really niche, smaller businesses, smaller publishers really coming through. Brands and agencies and publishers are getting really smart on how to use new channels, non-traditional channels, to really make impactful work. And I think I'm excited to see the diversity of work in the bookmarks next year, because we've taken a massive step forward, I think, this year.
I'm really excited to see the type of work that this year's work inspires. I think there were a couple of pieces that were just really extraordinary, that took a considerable amount of effort and time and craft into that. And for me, those things are an example to all of us. That's the stuff that stands out, and it's worth the squeeze. It's worth the effort. I think in the evolving tech topic, there was only a couple of pieces that stood out there, but they did it really well. And for me, it's about us being super ambitious, and to take next year, there's maybe 6 pieces in that we go that's incredible. Those are globally loved pieces, but are stem from local insights.
A big thank you to the IAB for putting all of this together. I think that long may this showcase continue and expand. I think this was great to see the work, to be able to talk about the work and some of the themes and trends that we're seeing through. So I hope it was well received, as it felt on my side. And so thank you to them.